Hi everybody, it's Ajanette and I'm here to talk about your cognitive development aspect of our developmental psychology chapters. Cognitive development is referencing our mental processes, our thinking, our reasoning, our intellect, just kind of our mental understanding of the world. Who you're looking at here is Jean Piaget, and he's one of the most famous developmental theorists in the field, and he specifically presented the cognitive development theory that really discusses cognitive development as occurring through natural maturation. So our mental growth and abilities and reasoning skills are just innate and they will develop in due time. Certainly we know that there are neural mechanisms that underline that cognitive reasoning, so we can definitely now connect it back to what we understand about brain development. And as those neural connections that we talked about earlier are forming, they're laying the groundwork for the mental abilities that they support. Jean Piaget's theory also suggested that our cognitive ability changes qualitatively over time, and there's very distinct abilities and differences that occur between the stages. So he is definitely a stage theory, and he suggests that we go through 4 primary stages of cognitive development, each with its own kind of features, characteristics, abilities, and limitations. So at the basis of his theory is this concept of a schema. A schema is your mental structure that kind of holds your understanding of every given concept and all the information related to that concept. So if you think of a kitty, imagine a file folder in your brain that stores everything you know about a kitty. They're cute, they have pointy ears, they're fluffy, they have whiskers, they have claws, they have a tail, they have this nice wispy skin. They can be playful. They have this cute little button triangle nose that you see in their little pointy ears, and they're just the adorable little things. Then I want you to think of, if you've ever seen the movie Monsters, Inc., and you know Sully, and what did Boo, the little girl in the movie, call Sully? She called him Kitty. Piaget suggested that when we stumble upon new information, we either assimilate that information or we accommodate that information, we assimilate the information into an existing schema, or we accommodate a schema to account for new information. In the case of assimilation, it's similar enough, if you look at the root word, it's similar enough to our existing knowledge and understanding that we just slip it right into our existing schema, and therefore the new information just becomes part of our understanding of Kitty. And that's why Boo called Sully Kitty, because he's got cute pointy ears, and he's got a cute little triangle nose, and his hair's all wispy and fluffy, and he's got these pointy little claws and a cute little tail. And all of her knowledge and understanding of Kitty, he was similar enough to just slip right in. So if you imagine the schema as a file folder, you open up the document on your screen and you add in new information and just hit save. Sometimes when we come across new information, we can't quite hit save, we have to hit save as, because we find that the new information, although it might be similar, it's different enough that we actually have to modify our existing schema to account for a kind of new understanding. So at some point in the movie, Sully changed from being a kitty to being a monster. Does anybody remember at what point in the movie Sully actually, or Boo, may have accommodated her existing schema and created a completely new schema for Sully? So if you guessed in the scare chamber, when Boo accidentally saw Sully screaming and demonstrating monster behavior, then that's the first time in the movie you actually see Boo afraid of Sully, and she ends up hiding behind Mikey. And that is evidence that she has engaged in accommodation. So as we as we go throughout life, we're going to engage upon new information, and that's going to cause us to form schemas, assimilate new information into existing schemas, and or modify existing schemas to account for new information, maybe creating separate and distinct schemas, as we saw with Boo and Sully. And so at each of the 4 stages of Piaget's theory, we are in fact gaining new schemas, creating new schemas, assimilating new information, and accommodating schemas. Stage 1 starts in the first 2 years of life, and that's what he called the sensory motor stage. If you look at the name of this stage, it actually tells you how the cognitive understanding of the world occurs primarily. And it primarily occurs through our senses and our motor or movement throughout the world. And so we use our sensory information and our motor skills to kind of explore the world. And as we do that, we gain an understanding, a mental and cognitive understanding of the world, which facilitates our increased cognitive development. At some point during this stage, probably about 9 or 10 months, children develop what's called object permanence. Prior to this, out of sight, out of mind applies. So when they no longer see an object in their minds, mentally, the object no longer exists. So if you've ever played peekaboo with an infant, peekaboo, you know that their face lights up and they get so excited and thrilled. That's because literally you're a magician. When they no longer see you, you no longer exist. So when you go, peekaboo, you literally just pulled a rabbit out of a hat, and they're like, wow, where did you come from? How did you do that? Because out of sight, out of mind, you disappear. Peekaboo, all of a sudden you appear. Once they've achieved object permanence, they understand that an object continues to exist. It's permanent in the world. It just does not, it's not necessarily always in your purview. And so that being said, when mom leaves them, they understand, oh my gosh, mom left me. Where did she go? How dare she? And they might actually show stranger anxiety and get upset by the fact that mom left them. Or when they're missing a toy or misplace a blanket, they may go on a hunt and search to track it down because they understand it now exists, even though it's out of sight, out of mind. Or excuse me, out of sight, it's no longer out of mind. The next stage is pre-operational, and Piaget referenced something called a mental operations. And mental operations are just an internal cognitive understanding of how things work and adapt together. And pre-operational children are before or precede their ability to engage in mental operations. And so during this stage, they have tremendous language acquisition. They can think intuitively, but they can't always explain the rationale behind their intuitions. But language allows them to think symbolically, and we also see them engaging in a significant amount of pretend play during this stage. So although they're not able to engage in full mental operations and kind of reason through things mentally in their head, they still very much have advanced cognitive abilities from the earlier stage. However, they're very what we call egocentric. Egocentric is when their world centers around their self. So ego means self and centric means centers. And it doesn't mean like self-centered, like that self-centered bastard that you are dating. It means like they're self-centered in that they literally cannot step outside their own mental minds and understand the mental perception of another human being. So they can't consider an alternate viewpoint. Additionally, they have very animistic thinking, and they often ascribe lifelike qualities to inanimate objects like, let's say, a little doll or a teddy bear or maybe a little truck. Like they can't leave it alone because it'll be sad. Or they're lonely, they want somebody to play with, or they might say that their doll is hungry too, so they're treating that doll like it's a real life human being and has feelings. Then they move on into concrete operations, so now they can perform mental operations, and this is in middle childhood, but those mental operations are limited to only concrete objects and concepts such as a chair, a couch, birds, pennies, things that actually exist in the world in a concrete substantive way. And they also are very kind of concrete and rigid in their thinking, very rule-based, very logical, orderly, sequential. They begin to categorize things on multiple dimensions. They begin to seriate or put things in order, and they're capable of reversibility or mental operations where they can kind of trace the steps back and specifically pinpoint when something happened, what did happen, or what didn't happen. And so as a consequence of that, they are certainly much more advanced in their reasoning than pre-operational thinking, but they're also kind of very rigid and inflexible in their thinking. They also understand this notion of conservation, which means that even though the appearance of something changes, they understand that in substance it remains the same. And there's different types of conservation of liquid, mass, number. Piaget goes through a number of tests, and I have put a video online showing my daughter Kayla going through those tests as well. And then there's a video of my son Cole. So you can see how they kind of reason. We can use those tests to kind of assess their cognitive reasoning. The final stage begins at about puberty onward, and this is when children are now able to think abstractly, so they can argue concepts such as justice and fairness and love and, you know, what constitutes love. And they really do now start to step into an adult world. They no longer see things concrete and rigidly. So they can argue, well, is that fair? Is that equitable? If you're allowed to be late to pick me up from school, why can't I be late and be given some grace when I'm late home from a date, let's say? So they want to discuss and debate, and not because they're being disrespectful, but because they're really they have these new abilities mentally, and they're kind of exercising those abilities. Additionally, that hypothetical deductive reasoning allows them to engage in things scientifically, where they're very systematic in their problem solving, and they understand the importance of controlling one variable and testing another, and that becomes very empowering. However, they do have adolescent egocentrism, and they return to kind of a self-centered perspective that really creates some limitations, where they experience what we call a personal fable, and they think that they're kind of indestructible. Nobody understands me. I'm unique. It won't happen to me. Oh, you just don't understand, Mom. Alexis used to tell me that all the time. You just don't understand. I'd give her advice. Oh, you just don't understand, Mom. And I would say, Alexis, I've been 14. Have you ever been 40? And she says, no. And I say, okay, then who doesn't understand whom? Because I have walked in her shoes. She just doesn't have the ability to understand that. And then another thing is they engage in an imaginary audience, where they literally think they are on stage and the whole world's looking at them. And so it's the end of the world should something embarrassing happen, like they trip and fall, or they spill something on themselves, or they have a big pimple on their nose. Oh no, I just can't go to school because everybody will be looking at me. Not necessarily, because we have our own problems and our own pimples to worry about. But it is definitely one of the limitations of that adolescent egocentrism returning to the forefront. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to come back in a follow-up video so we can move on and discuss some of the other concepts and theories that apply.